Before any European ships touched its shores, the land we now know was a vibrant collection of peoples. Many different kingdoms and communities existed here, each with its own unique ways. They had distinct languages, rich traditions, and complex systems of governance that had evolved over centuries. Great empires like the Oyo Empire in the southwest flourished, known for its cavalry and intricate political structure. The Benin Kingdom, famed for its stunning bronze sculptures and organized guilds, held considerable power. These were not simple, isolated villages, they were sophisticated societies. Further north, the Sokoto Caliphate stood as a vast Islamic state, influencing a huge area with its learning and administration. Across the diverse landscape, from the dense rainforests of the south to the drier savannas of the north, countless ethnic groups like the Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, Fulani, Kanuri, Ijaw, and many others lived. They had their own intricate social systems, spiritual beliefs, and artistic expressions that were deeply interwoven with their daily lives. Their interactions were varied, some engaged in peaceful trade and cultural exchange, while others experienced periods of conflict and rivalry, shaping the dynamic political map of the region. These societies had established trade routes that crisscrossed the land and extended far beyond. They traded goods such as salt, cola nuts, textiles, and metalwork, connecting different regions and fostering economic interdependence. Skilled artisans produced remarkable crafts, from intricate carvings to beautifully woven fabrics reflecting the aesthetic sensibilities of their cultures. Storytelling, music, and dance were integral parts of community life, serving to pass down history, values, and traditions from one generation to the next. This was a land alive with history and culture long before the name Nigeria was ever conceived. The diversity was immense. Each group had its own understanding of the world, its own heroes, and its own history. They governed themselves through various means, from powerful monarchs and councils of elders to more decentralized village assemblies. The idea of a single, unified political entity encompassing all these varied peoples was not present. Their identities were primarily local, tied to their specific kingdom, ethnic group, or community. This rich mosaic of human experience formed the foundation upon which future, more encompassing identities would later be built, often through external forces. Into this complex world of established kingdoms and diverse cultures stepped Sir George Taubman Goldie. He was an ambitious man from the Isle of Man, driven by a vision of British commercial and imperial dominance in Africa. Goldie was not a government official initially, but a businessman with a keen eye for opportunity. He saw the immense potential of the Niger River basin for trade, particularly in palm oil, which was in high demand in industrializing Europe. His arrival marked a significant turning point for the region, heralding an era of increasing European influence and eventual colonial control. Goldie understood that individual trading companies competing against each other were weak. He believed that a unified British commercial presence was necessary to effectively exploit the resources of the Niger area and to counter the influence of other European powers like the French and Germans, who also had ambitions in Africa. With great determination and shrewd business tactics, he began the process of amalgamating various British trading firms operating along the Niger River. This was a challenging task, requiring him to persuade, cajole, and sometimes outmaneuver his rivals into joining his vision of a single, powerful entity. In 1879, he successfully formed the United African Company. This was a crucial step in his larger plan. The company aimed to control the trade along the lower Niger River, creating a virtual monopoly for British interests. Goldie was a master strategist, understanding both the commercial and political dimensions of his enterprise. He knew that economic control could pave the way for political dominance. His company began to establish more trading posts, sign treaties with local chiefs, and assert its authority in the areas where it operated, often using its growing power to its advantage. Goldie's ambition was not just about profit, it was deeply intertwined with the imperialistic fervor of the time. He saw himself as an empire builder, expanding British influence in a part of the world that was still largely independent of European control. He worked tirelessly to convince the British government of the strategic importance of the Niger territories. His efforts were aimed at securing official backing for his commercial venture, which he believed would ultimately benefit the British Empire by adding vast new territories and resources to its global portfolio. His actions set the stage for a more formal British takeover. Sir George Goldie's United African Company was soon transformed into something even more powerful. In 1886, after intense lobbying and demonstrating its ability to govern the territories it controlled, the company received a royal charter from the British government. It was renamed the Royal Niger Company. This charter granted the company immense powers. It could administer justice, raise its own police force, and even make treaties with local rulers on behalf of the British Crown. This effectively made the Royal Niger Company a quasi-governmental entity, ruling over a vast area. With the royal charter in hand, Goldie and his company moved swiftly to consolidate their control over the Niger River basin. They signed numerous treaties with local chiefs and emirs. Many of these treaties were complex, and it is often debated whether the local leaders fully understood the implications of what they were signing, particularly clauses that ceded sovereignty or granted exclusive trading rights. The company used its superior military technology and organizational strength to enforce these agreements and to suppress any resistance to its expanding authority, gradually extending its reach inland. The Royal Niger Company established a network of fortified trading posts along the Niger and Benue rivers. These posts served as centers for commerce, administration, and military control. The company's officials collected customs duties, regulated trade, and adjudicated disputes, effectively governing the lives of millions of people within its sphere of influence. This period was marked by the company's aggressive pursuit of its commercial interests, often at the expense of local populations and their traditional economic systems. The focus was on maximizing profits from commodities like palm oil, palm kernels, and ivory for the European market. Goldie's leadership was instrumental in preventing other European powers, particularly France, from gaining a significant foothold in the lower Niger region. He skillfully navigated the complex diplomatic landscape of the scramble for Africa, ensuring that Britain's claims were recognized. By the late 1890s, the Royal Niger Company had laid the essential groundwork for the formal British colonization of the territories. Its administration, however controversial, had created a semblance of a unified political unit where none had existed before, albeit under foreign commercial control, setting the stage for the next chapter in the region's history. As the 19th century drew to a close, the British government decided to take more direct control over the territories administered by the Royal Niger Company. The company's charter was revoked in 1900, and its lands were transferred to the British Crown. This vast expanse, along with other nearby British-controlled areas like the Niger Coast Protectorate and the Lagos Colony, needed a more formal and unified administrative structure. With this consolidation came a practical problem. What should this newly defined colonial territory be called? It was a vast and diverse area, home to many different peoples. The existing names were cumbersome or too specific. Terms like Royal Niger Company territories were descriptive of a commercial enterprise's holdings but hardly suitable for a formal British protectorate. Niger Coast Protectorate only referred to a part of the larger region. A new encompassing name was required, one that could represent the entirety of the British holdings in this part of West Africa. The process of naming is never neutral. It often reflects the perspective and priorities of those in power, and this case was no different. The name would become a label for millions of people. The search for a name was not just an administrative exercise, it was also about crafting an identity, at least from the perspective of the colonizers. The name would appear on maps, in official documents, and in international discourse. It would become the handle by which this collection of diverse peoples and lands would be known to the outside world. For the British officials tasked with this, the name needed to be practical, perhaps geographically indicative, and ideally something that sounded appropriate for a British colonial possession. The local inhabitants, of course, had no say in this matter. This period was a critical juncture. The amalgamation of different protectorates and colonies was underway, leading to the creation of the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Colony and Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. These entities themselves would later be merged in 1914. The question of a name, therefore, was part of a larger process of colonial state building. It was about drawing lines on a map, establishing administrative structures, and imposing a new order on existing societies. The label chosen would inevitably carry historical weight and shape perceptions for generations to come. Section 5, An Emperor's Honor, the Godesia Proposal. During the discussions about what to call the territories consolidated from the Royal Niger Company's domain, a suggestion arose that was quite personal. Some individuals, likely admirers of Sir George Goldie or those who wished to flatter him, proposed the name Godesia. This name was clearly derived from Goldie, intending to honor the man who had played such a pivotal role in bringing these vast lands under British influence and commercial control. It was not an uncommon practice at the time for territories to be named after prominent colonial figures, as seen with Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes. The rationale behind proposing Godesia was straightforward from a colonial perspective. Sir George Goldie was widely seen in Britain as a visionary empire builder. He had successfully outmaneuvered European rivals, particularly the French, and had established a profitable British enterprise that effectively governed a massive territory for over a decade. Naming the land after him would be a permanent tribute to his efforts and achievements in expanding the British Empire. It would cement his legacy directly onto the map of Africa, a lasting testament to his commercial and imperial prowess. This idea of naming a country after an individual colonizer was very much a product of the imperial age. It reflected a mindset where the contributions of European explorers, traders, and administrators were seen as paramount in the civilizing mission and the creation of new colonial states. The perspectives or feelings of the indigenous populations who would live under such a name were rarely, if ever, considered important in these decisions. The focus was on acknowledging and celebrating the agents of empire, and Goldie was undoubtedly a significant agent in this region. However, the proposal of Godesia did not gain universal acceptance, even among the British establishment. While Goldie's contributions were recognized, naming such a vast and populous territory directly after him might have been seen by some as overly grandiose or potentially controversial. The act of naming carries significant symbolic weight, and Godesia would have forever tied the identity of the land and its people to one specific British individual, emphasizing the colonial conquest in a very direct and personal manner. This set the stage for a different naming suggestion to emerge. Section 6. A refusal of legacy, why Goldie said no. Interestingly, Sir George Goldie himself is reported to have refused the honor of having the territory named Godesia after him. While the exact reasons for his refusal are not extensively documented in easily accessible public records, several plausible explanations exist. One possibility is a sense of modesty, or perhaps a desire to avoid the kind of personal aggrandizement that such a name would entail. He might have felt that it was inappropriate or that it would draw unnecessary attention or criticism towards him personally, overshadowing the broader imperial project. Another factor could have been political pragmatism. Goldie was a shrewd operator, well aware of the complexities of colonial administration and the potential for resentment. Naming the territory Godesia might have been seen as too blatant a celebration of conquest, potentially stirring up more resistance or making the task of governance more difficult. A more neutral, geographically based name might have seemed more practical and less likely to provoke strong negative reactions, both within the territory and perhaps even among rival colonial powers or critics of imperialism back in Britain. It's also possible that Goldie understood that his legacy was already secure through the actions of the Royal Niger Company and the establishment of British control. He might have believed that his achievements spoke for themselves and did not require such a direct and personal form of commemoration. Perhaps he foresaw that names tied too closely to individuals could become problematic if perceptions of those individuals changed over time. Or, he may have simply preferred a name that was more descriptive of the geographical reality of the territory, aligning with common naming conventions for other colonies. Whatever his precise motivations, Goldie's declination of Godesia opened the door for other suggestions. His refusal, whether rooted in humility, strategic foresight, or a preference for a different kind of legacy, was a crucial moment. It meant that the identity of this vast West African territory would not be explicitly tied to his name. This decision, or lack of insistence on his part, allowed for an alternative name to eventually be chosen, one that would derive its inspiration from a prominent natural feature of the land, rather than from a colonial administrator. Section 7. A Woman's Insight. Flora Shaw coins Nigeria. The name that was ultimately adopted, Nigeria, was suggested by Miss Flora Shaw. She was a highly respected British journalist and writer, who later became Lady Lugard After marrying Sir Frederick Lugard, the first High Commissioner of the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria, and later Governor-General of the Amalgamated Nigeria, Shaw was the colonial editor for a very influential newspaper. She wrote extensively on British colonial affairs and was considered an expert in the field, possessing considerable knowledge about Africa. Her voice carried weight in colonial circles. In an article published on January 8, 1897, Flora Shaw made her suggestion. She was discussing the need for a more convenient term to describe the territories administered by the Royal Niger Company and other British spheres of influence in the region. She argued that terms like Royal Niger Company's territories were too long and awkward for everyday use. She proposed Nigeria as a shorter, more practical alternative. Her reasoning was straightforward and based on the most prominent geographical feature of the area, the Great Niger River. Shaw's proposed name, Nigeria, literally meant Niger area or the land around the Niger River and its basin. The name Niger itself was ancient, its exact origins debated but likely stemming from local terms for the river, possibly Gur-en Igeren, River of Rivers, in Tuareg, or the Latin Niger meaning black, though the latter is less likely referring to the river itself than perhaps the people. Shaw simply took this existing, well-known name of the river and coined a term for the vast territories it flowed through and nourished. It was a geographical designation, logical and seemingly neutral. Her suggestion gained traction and was eventually adopted by the British authorities. It was seen as a sensible and descriptive name. It avoided the potential controversy of naming the territory after an individual, and instead linked it to a dominant natural landmark that defined much of the region's geography and economic life. Thus, through Flora Shaw's journalistic insight and her influential platform, the land of diverse kingdoms and peoples received the name that it carries to this day, a name born from the river that is its lifeblood. Section 8. The power of a name identity forged in words. Names are never just labels, they carry deep significance and have the power to shape identity, perception, and even destiny. The name Nigeria, derived from the Niger River, rooted the new colonial entity in its geography. It offered a seemingly neutral term, focusing on a natural feature rather than a conqueror or a specific ethnic group. This geographical basis provided a common denominator for the diverse peoples who found themselves within the borders drawn by the British. The river, after all, touched many communities, even if it didn't define all of them equally. Imagine if the name Godesia had been chosen instead. The identity of the nation would have been explicitly and permanently linked to Sir George Goldie, a British trader and imperialist. This would have constantly highlighted the colonial imposition and the subjugation of indigenous peoples under one man's ambition, albeit one acting within the broader imperial system. Every time the name Godesia was uttered, it would have been a reminder of conquest and foreign domination in a very personal way. This could have fostered a different kind of national consciousness, perhaps one more overtly defined by resistance or resentment towards that specific colonial figurehead. The choice of Nigeria, while still imposed by the colonizer, allowed for a slightly more organic development of national identity after independence. It was a name that could be reclaimed and reinterpreted by Nigerians themselves, linked to the land rather than solely to its colonial architects. While the colonial legacy is undeniable and complex, the name Nigeria at least offered a geographical touchstone. It allowed for narratives of unity to be built around the shared space defined by the river and its connecting basins. However imperfectly this reflected the pre-colonial realities or the diverse experiences within the nation. Ultimately, a name becomes imbued with the history, struggles, achievements, and aspirations of the people who bear it. Nigeria today evokes a complex tapestry of experiences, the richness of its cultures, the pain of its civil war, the vibrancy of its arts, the challenges of its governance, and the resilience of its people. While Flora Shaw coined it from a colonial viewpoint, Nigerians have lived, breathed, and redefined Nigeria through their own experiences. A name like Godesia might have made this process of collective ownership and redefinition significantly more fraught, forever centering the colonial master in the national story. Section 9. Whispers of Godesia, a different historical path. Contemplating what might have been if the territory had been named Godesia is an exercise in historical speculation, yet it offers insight into the subtle power of names. Would the path to independence have felt different for people living in a land explicitly named after their colonizer's agent? Perhaps the nationalist movements would have rallied even more fiercely against a name that so overtly symbolized their subjugation. The very act of seeking independence might have also included a more urgent push for a name change, a symbolic reclaiming of identity that might have been more pronounced than with the geographically derived Nigeria. The psychological impact on the nascent national identity could have been considerable. Living under the banner of Godesia might have instilled a constant, low-level reminder of the colonial hierarchy, potentially making it harder to foster a sense of truly independent nationhood in the early post-colonial years. National symbols, anthems, and narratives would have had to contend with this ever-present reference to Goldie. Perhaps alternative indigenous names would have been more seriously considered post-independence, golding to a different national branding altogether. It's possible the struggle for a new name would have been a central part of decolonization. Internationally, Godesia would have sat alongside Rhodesia, possibly creating a perception of the country as a more direct and personal imperial creation. This might have subtly influenced diplomatic relations, or the way the country was perceived on the global stage, particularly during the Cold War and the rise of anti-colonial sentiment. The name itself would have been a constant point of discussion and debate, a stark symbol of its colonial origins that was harder to overlook or assimilate than the more geographically neutral Nigeria. It would have been a heavier cloak to wear. While Nigeria is not without its own complex colonial baggage, its connection to the Niger River provided a geographical, rather than personal, point of reference. This allowed for a narrative that, while acknowledging colonial creation, could also emphasize the land itself and the diverse peoples within it. Godesia would have perpetually centered Sir George Goldie, the British merchant adventurer, in the very identity of the nation. The echoes of that alternative name serve as a potent reminder of how nomenclature can shape historical memory and the collective psyche of a nation, underscoring the profound influence of the words we use to define ourselves and our world.